In this video, I'm going to show you one technique I use to manage posterior occlusion and the posterior shape of the splint for flat plane appliances with anterior guidance. What we're going to do is we're going to mark the opposing cusps. And we're going to use that to generate kind of a blended flat surface. I don't know if you noticed when I accidentally clicked subtract posterior surface, it complained that there was no surface to subtract. And that's because we hadn't done this step yet. So this creates a nice blended surface that just barely kisses the cusp tips. And depending on how accurate you are with your placement, you're going to get a little more intersection on some than others. Now what we can do is we can use that surface to both trim and sculpt too for our splint. Okay, the issue is that it's only going to pull parts of the splint down that are closer than this threshold. So when you have more clearance in the front than you do in the back, you either have voids that don't get pulled down, or you have to increase this threshold significantly. When you do that, you start to interfere with the posterior part of the splint and possibly even the internal surface. So I'm going to undo this. I'm going to unhide the splint shell. Take a look at where we need the most added material. On the left side, I'm going to add virtual wax, and on the right side, I'm going to sculpt. We'll do the sculpt first. So we'll use the Go to Sculpt. That takes a bunch of Blender settings and optimizes them for sculpting on this mesh. And I'm going to sample the detail so that we don't add too much detail that's not needed. I'm going to use the Fill Deepen brush. Use that to quickly fill in the embrasures. And the grooves. Great brush. I think the Fill Deepen brush and the Scrape brush make having, that alone makes Blender worth having, even if I didn't use it for anything else. Okay, once I've done that, we're going to go to the Flatten brush, and this will buff down your cusp tips a little bit. Don't worry, we're going to add them back up. Now we're going to go to the clay strips. You can also use the layer brush. Layer brush is a little less controllable, in my opinion. It's more precise, but I prefer clay strips. It looks more organic. Once you get this kind of built up, just lightly hit it with the smooth brush. And now let's check our lower jaw. Good. Use that to come back out of sculpt mode. And now when we subtract our posterior surface, we can use a very small limit, and we'll get a much better surface back here. Okay, I'm going to undo one last time. And on this side, we'll use a wax curve. We'll add virtual wax to that curve using the ellipsoid shape. Make it a little wider and a little thicker. We'll fuse that. we'll go to sculpt and just kind of smooth that area down a little bit. Fill these areas here. That's probably good. You can waste a lot of time sculpting. And we'll subtract the functional surface one more time. All right, there we go. So you can see, both give a pretty good result. There's gonna be a lot more sculpting to do right there. Maybe if we take it up just a little bit more, it will grab some more of that stuff. Yeah, but even that, it's gonna be a little bit of a hassle. So let's take this to sculpt mode one more time. And when you have a nice, you have it pretty even like this, just get the smooth brush about the size of the shelf here, weaken it just a touch, and just attack the junction there. And in my opinion, that does a really great job. Over here, a little more of a pain. Right, and you can smooth this down. Okay, and if we turn on the lower jaw, we can evaluate how we're doing. Yeah, this is going to set us up pretty well for some nice point contacts in the posterior. All right. And while we're at it, I guess I'll just go ahead and show you adding an anterior ramp. So I'm actually going to turn off the shell, or hide the shell, turn on the lower jaw. I'm going to draw my wax curve on the model, which doesn't matter what's selected, it'll draw on anything in the scene. I'm going to go from premolar to premolar here. And actually, I'm gonna do that one more time. We're gonna go from the center of the premolar. I'll show you why in just a second. We're gonna use that to help blend this ramp in very evenly. And so we're gonna make the posterior width only 3 and the anterior width 8. What that's gonna do is make this flare quite a bit, so that now our shell, it's already blended in. That's why we took it into the midline, and that's why I drew it on the model itself. Okay, let's make the flare -25. Gives us a little more ramp. Okay, and then I'm going to draw one more wax curve right down here. We'll use the ball shape. Make it a little bigger, and that'll help blend that in. Okay, fuse that. Now we're ready to use our articulator. Set the incisal guidance at 25. We're going to let the articulator do the work to actually create the surface of the ramp. Okay, this is going to go pretty slowly because we're screen recording. I usually get about 20 frames per second when I'm doing this not screen recording, so about 10 times faster. So I'll time lapse this as I do the excursions to save you the watching time. Okay, and one thing that's really nice about this is this relaxing ramp. And that'll keep you from having a ledge right here on your rim. If you watch closely, that's going to let the jaw relax back as if maybe we hadn't truly captured CR. And I'll just let that go 1.5 millimeters or so. Okay, so now we've got this nice functional surface. We'll subtract that from the splint. And the functional surface is called occlusal plane. So you can see there we've generated a nice splint with anterior guidance and canine guidance. You can go touch it up. With some final sculpting. I would definitely blend this in so that it's easy to polish and not offensive to their lip. Same thing down here. Again, I'm probably gonna smooth all this. Use the fill brush to fill in any crevices and then smooth it. One thing you can do, you can actually generate your functional surface first before adding your wax elements. And if this, when you add your virtual wax, it's kind of low res. So I'm going to go with the clay strips brush, change the strength to super low. And just by doing this, wherever I sculpt, it's going to change the resolution. Okay. So with a really weak brush, it won't actually change the surface much. Then at the end, you can actually subtract that functional surface again, and it'll dial it in at a little higher resolution. So here you can see our canine guidance, anterior guidance, and then our single posterior stops. You can see the lower jaw just barely touching, point contacts on every tooth. And so this is going to drop in. If you took a bite that exists, if you scan this at an open bite, your initial occlusion here is going to be very good. It'll be as good as the accuracy of your bite scan. Okay, the excursions and everything are going to depend on how well our average values of the articulator match the patient.